This footage from the early 1910s shows the Russian royal family, the Romanovs. In it we see Tsar Nicolas, Tsarina Alexandra and their son Tsarevich Alexei, followed closely behind by their daughters Grand Duchesses Olga, Tatiana, Maria and Anastasia, wearing white dresses and hats. Just a few short years later, the entire family would be wiped out within minutes of each other under horrific circumstances. This is History Calling, where I bring you new videos every Friday on all aspects of history, and today we're going to look at what happened to the Russian imperial family and why. Make sure you stay till the end to also hear the decades-long mystery surrounding what happened to their bodies and why rumours persisted for nearly 90 years that Anastasia had somehow escaped her family's brutal fate and survived. Nicholas was born in 1868, the eldest son of Tsar Alexander III of Russia and a member of the Romanov family who had ruled the country since 1613. On the 20th of October 1894, his father died, and Nicky, as he was known by his family, ascended to the throne. He married the 22-year-old Princess Alex of Hesse, who took the Russian name Alexandra Fedorovna just 3.5 weeks later, and the couple were crowned together in 1896. The Tsar and Tsarina were desperate to have a son, as Russian law forbade the throne from being inherited by a female. However, this proved easier said than done. Their 4 daughters arrived one after the other in 1895, 1897, 1899 and 1901, and it wasn't until 1904 that the longed-for son Alexei was finally born. Tragically, it soon became clear that the boy had inherited the blood disorder haemophilia from his mother's family, meaning that it was incredibly difficult for his blood to clot, and even small bumps, bruises and cuts could be life-threatening. This illness was hidden from the public, but it would be one factor in the ultimate downfall of the Romanovs. On top of this personal catastrophe, the early 20th century was a turbulent time for Russia. Nicholas, who was not a very capable leader, started a war with Japan in 1904, which Russia lost, then struggled to deal with issues including a failed revolution led by unhappy workers in 1905 and World War I, which began in 1914. Things were not helped by his wife's reliance on a disreputable, self-proclaimed monk and mystic, Grigory Rasputin, who she believed could heal their son Alexei, but whose behaviour and involvement with the family were deeply unpopular amongst the Russian people. Alexandra only made the situation worse when she was left in charge of the Russian government while Nicholas took charge of the army and gave Rasputin a formal position within that government. The Tsar and Tsarina relied heavily on the advice given to them by their friend, as they called him, despite warnings from family and advisors about his disreputable lifestyle and the danger they were placing themselves in through their near obsession with following his instructions and their mismanagement of the government. Rasputin was eventually assassinated in December 1916, but the damage to the imperial family's reputation was done. Less than 3 months later, there were marches by women in Petrograd on the 23rd of February, which was International Women's Day in the old Julian-style calendar, then still in use in Russia, to protest against bread shortages and the government. These quickly spiraled into full-scale revolution. The army refused to support Nicholas, and after rejecting the idea of abdicating in favour of his son Alexei because of the boy's poor health, he abdicated on both their behalves on the 2nd of March 1917. This temporarily made his brother Michael the new Tsar, however he too abdicated within a day. Imperial Russia had come to an end, and for the remainder of their lives the former royal family would be held prisoners, first by the provisional government set up in place of imperial rule, then by the Bolsheviks, who seized control of the country in October. At first they were kept in Alexander Palace near St. Petersburg. Though held in isolation from the rest of the world, they were allowed to walk in the gardens and plant vegetables. The children were recovering from measles, which had caused the girls' hair to fall out, and so in July 1917 they shaved their remaining hair off, as did Alexei, as a show of solidarity with his sisters. Initially there had been hopes that the family could go into exile in England, but Nicholas's cousin, George V of Great Britain, retracted an offer of asylum due to political pressures at home. As 1917 progressed, there were concerns for the safety of the former imperial family and worries that the ex-Tsar might be the focal point for a counter-revolution. On the 1st of August, they were therefore dispatched by train to the governor's house in Tobolsk, Siberia. Here, life was more restricted, so much so that Anastasia apologised in her letters to a friend for how empty they were, saying, "I am terribly sorry my letters turned out to be so stupid and boring, but nothing interesting happens here." She and her sisters would sit at the windows watching the people pass by outside, and this gives us some distraction, she said. The girls made friends with the guards too, talking to them and decorating Christmas trees for them, and the former Grand Duchesses even put on a farcical play to amuse everyone in the house. The Bolsheviks didn't take kindly to the guards befriending the prisoners though, and replaced them with far stricter men in February 1918. In the face of plots to rescue and restore Nicolas and his family to power, some wanted the family killed right away, or Nicolas put on trial. However, for the time being, they were moved to Ekaterinburg, a bastion of Bolshevik strength. Alexei was too ill to travel, and so he and his sisters Olga, Tatiana and Anastasia remained in Tobolsk, whilst Nicolas, Alexandra and Maria left on the 26th of April, arriving on the 30th. They were placed here in Ipatiev House, which was known as the House of Special Purpose, where they were joined in May by the remaining children. Again, life was even more restricted, and the family were told it was meant to resemble a prison regime. It did. There were difficult negotiations just to be allowed to open a small window in the heat, their possessions were stolen, and food and outdoor exercise were rationed. The guards did soften towards them over time, however, and several were very taken with the younger three Grand Duchesses. Indeed, Maria's close relationship with one caused a rift with her mother and sister Olga. The Ipatiev regime would last only a few months, however. In mid-June, as the Czech Legion, which might have freed Nicolas and his family, approached Ekaterinburg, it was decided that the Ural Regional Soviet categorically refuses to take responsibility for transferring Nicolas Romanov in the direction of Moscow and considers it necessary to liquidate them. There is grave danger citizen Romanov will fall into the hands of Czechoslovaks and other counter-revolutionaries. We cannot turn away from our duty to the revolution. Romanov's family must also be liquidated. This chilling plan was soon put into action. The family's sympathetic guards were replaced with hardline Bolsheviks, and on the 11th of July a mine shaft in which to dump the bodies was selected in woods not far from Ipatiev House. The executions had now been approved in Moscow, allegedly by the head of the new Soviet government, Vladimir Lenin, though historians cannot agree on the extent of his involvement, and all that remained was to work out the exact timings. This didn't take long. Their jailer Yakov Mikhailovich Yurovsky recorded that he began to plan the assassinations on the 15th of July, complaining that it's no easy matter to arrange an execution, contrary to what some people think. At 8 p.m. on the 16th of July, as the family ate dinner, Yurovsky told his men that they would shoot the Romanovs and their remaining attendants, 11 people in all, that night. 2 men backed out, unwilling to kill the girls, and the final group of assassins numbered 8 or 10, several of them drunk, and one only 17 years old. Alexandra's final ever diary entry noted that she went to bed at 10:30 p.m. that evening. 3 hours later, in the early morning of the 17th of July, a truck was brought to the house. The family and their servants, who were named Ivan Karatunov, Alexei Trupp, Anna Demidova and Eugene Botkin, were awoken and told that they needed to be moved for their own safety. They were given time to dress, then at 2:15 a.m. they were led into this basement room. The damage you see on the walls occurred in 1919 when investigators tore the room apart to retrieve evidence of what had happened that night. Either Nicolas or Alexandra, historians aren't sure which, asked for chairs for the former Tsarina and her son. These were duly brought in. The two sat, with Nicolas in front of the boy and Tatiana behind her mother, with Anastasia at her sister's side. Olga and Maria were behind them, against the wall. The truck was now brought into the courtyard of the house, and the driver told to rev the engine to drown out the noise of what was to come. Inside, Yurovsky read out a short statement. In view of the fact that your relatives continue their offensive against Soviet Russia, the Presidium of the Ural Regional Soviet has decided to sentence you to death. Nicolas couldn't comprehend what he was hearing, and he asked that the statement be read again. Yurovsky complied, but when Nicolas still stammered, What? He pulled out his gun, said "this," and shot the former Tsar in the chest. The other assassins followed suit, and what exactly happened next was so chaotic that historians are still unable to establish the precise course of events. According to Simon Sebag Montefiore, however, all the assassins initially aimed at Nicolas, and the room quickly filled with bullets, smoke, and screams. Some of the servants had been hit as well, but Alexandra and the children were not immediately fired upon. Then, as she crossed herself, the former empress was killed by a bullet to the head. Maria tried to run for the door, but was shot down by a bullet to the thigh. Yurovsky then had to order the shooting stopped and the doors opened to let the smoke out so that the assassins could see what they were doing and not shoot each other. As the smoke cleared, it became obvious that only the former Tsar, Tsarina and 2 servants were dead. The gunfire now resumed, but the girls and even Alexei, who was still rooted to his chair in terror, were protected to some extent by jewels sewn into their blouses and shirt. In the end, the 13-year-old former Tsarevich was bayoneted, then finally shot in the head. His sisters tried to escape, but they too were shot, then bayoneted, as the exasperated assassins discovered their bullets seemingly bounced off the girls' jewel-laden corsets. The whole ordeal took between 10 and 20 terrifying minutes. As the bodies were carried out to the truck, 2 of the former Grand Duchesses, most likely Anastasia and Maria, spluttered to life and started to cry. They were bayoneted again until they were dead. The assassins began to loot the family's belongings until ordered to stop and return what they had stolen by Yurovsky, and at 3 a.m. the truck left Ipatiev House to take the bodies to the pre-arranged mine shaft. In another sign of how shambolic the entire operation was, this truck soon broke down and the bodies had to be transferred into carts. At almost 7 a.m. they reached the mine, where the Romanovs and their attendants were stripped, the last of their belongings taken and their clothing burned. When they were tossed into the mine shaft, however, it quickly became apparent that it wasn't deep enough to adequately hide them. After much toing and froing, they were retrieved in the early hours of the 19th of July. Alexei and one of his sisters were then burnt and buried. The others were put into a freshly dug grave 70 feet away and doused in sulfuric acid before being buried too. As news of what had happened leaked out, the lack of bodies allowed rumours to spring up that one of the girls, Anastasia, had survived the massacre. Most notably, a woman later identified as a Polish factory worker named Anna Anderson would claim to be the lost Grand Duchess. DNA testing conducted on hair and tissue samples preserved after her death in 1984 showed that she was lying. No one had survived. Instead, the remains of all the Romanovs and their servants continue to lie for decades in the Koptyaki woods outside Sverdlovsk. Ipatiev House was destroyed in 1977, and in 1979 some of the Romanovs were discovered by 2 amateur historians. This was during the Soviet era, however, and so the discovery was not made public and the bones were reburied. It was only in July 1991, after the fall of the Soviet Union, that the bones of 9 of the 11 murder victims were recovered. DNA from Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, and other members of the extended royal family identified the Tsar and Tsarina, and from there 3 of their daughters could also be confirmed as present. Alexei and the remaining girl had not been located. In 1998, on the 80th anniversary of the murders, the Tsar, his family and their servants were buried at the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg. The Romanovs' tombs can be seen in this picture. A new cathedral, named the Church on Blood in honour of all saints resplendent in the Russian land, was built on the former site of Ipatiev House, and in 2000, Nicolas, Alexandra and their children were canonised as passion bearers by the Russian Orthodox Church. 7 years later, the heavily damaged remains of Alexei and one of his sisters, popularly believed to be Maria but possibly Anastasia, were discovered, though the church refused to recognise them. In 2015, DNA was used once again to confirm their identity, and they were then supposed to be buried with their family that October. However, the church continues to delay, asking for additional DNA testing. As it stands, the shards of bone, which are all that is left of these 2 siblings, remain in boxes in the Russian state archives. That brings us to the end of this video on the tragic fate of the Romanovs and their servants. Let me know in the comments section below if you have any further questions about what happened to them and why. As I mentioned earlier, there's still considerable dispute as to some of the details of what happened in July 1918, so I'd be interested to hear your take on the events surrounding the Romanovs' deaths and why you think they were killed. I'll leave links in the description box to one of the books I used when putting this video together in case you'd like to check it out. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications switched on so you don't miss my new video next Friday, and until then, keep learning.